Should we put the lights down a little bit? No? Okay, I have a video here. Is that ready to go? You can just start that. All right. Thank you for being here tonight. I'm going to tell you a story that might change the way you think about a lot of things. And that story really began when I decided to leave my own career as an investment lawyer and advising multinational corporations like ExxonMobil and Monsanto and Bayer, and today as an environmental activist. That really gives me what you call a criminal record. And so around the year 2001, 2002, I said, I've had enough advising these guys coming into China. I'm going to put that down, and I'm going to stop my career as a lawyer, and I'm going to go search for Shangri-La. I'll tell you something, I never found it. But in the journey for Shangri-La, do we have sound? Yes. Because you're going to hear what people were telling me when I asked, where is Shangri-La? And wherever we went, filming on 3 expeditions, we asked one question, where is Shangri-La? This is what people said.
For me, Shangri-La is a paradise. Imaginary country. It's a holy land. Hidden country. Shangri-La is inside of you. Try to find it.
So I tried to find it. And the first expedition between 2002 and 2004, I led 3 expeditions across the Qinghai Tibetan Plateau in search of the mythical kingdom of Shangri-La. And the first expedition, we went from Tibet to Qinghai to Yunnan province. And what really struck me on this first expedition was this was one of the last places in Asia that was really naturally whole, as of yet undestroyed. Moreover, people's culture was still there intact. People were not driven so much by material accumulation, which was going on all over China. They were caring more about their community, their spirituality, and in turn, that spirituality had in it a set of coded rules about the protection of the environment. So there was already this established system of respect for the environment that was connected to community. And it changed the way I thought. At the same time, there were 3 cities that were fighting for the name Shangri-La. There was Dali, Lijiang, and Zhongdian. They weren't interested in spirituality. They were interested in tourism money and using the name Shangri-La for development. And so finally, the government decided that a place called Zhongdian would become Shangri-La. So I went to Zhongdian, and there I asked environmentalists on the ground, what is Shangri-La? And let's listen to what they say.
In my mind, Shangri-La is a real world that don't leave phosphorus, don't leave the tourism. And I do agree that it's tremendously important to ensure that it remains that way. I do worry very much, though, about using something like Shangri-La, which is a Hollywood myth, to try and maintain something that has its own authentic heritage, its own authentic roots.
Shangri-La means many things to many people and different things to different people. It is not only biodiversity, it is not only cultural diversity, it is not only mountains, it is not only spiritual aspects. I don't bother about Shangri-La so much. I bother more about this area. And if we can keep the culture of Tibetans, the Nashi, the Yi, the Marimasa alive, then the mountains will stay alive and will keep the environment. We shouldn't celebrate.
Welcome from the government here. Anything we wanted to do was fine. I hope that it's not a nominal effort that is made. Its own historical identities, and not invented, officially invented identities, the people themselves
But actually, the person who influenced me the most was this monk, the abbot of Jokang Monastery in Lhasa. And he explained what Shangri-La is. Maybe we put some sound up for the abbot. What he's saying is basically the corporations are competing for their control over business, and in turn they're destroying the environment. And this competition, or the driving of competitive forces, is destroying Mother Earth. He says in the end, this sort of market fundamentalism will destroy the planet. And he's saying if we destroy the planet, we're not going to be living, up in the moon. We're not going to be living in the sun. We can't transport ourselves anywhere else. In the end of the day, we have to live with this planet, and therefore we have to, as humanity, protect it. And those are the messages he said. We're not going to go anywhere else. This monk was a major influence on me. And we'll come back to him in a moment. But the second expedition was in 2003. And we took Hilton's book, Lost Horizons, which is what articulated the term Shangri-La, and we followed this book. And the book was based on a series of reports by Joseph Rock, National Geographic's first bureau chief in Western China. And we literally went to all of Joseph Rock's locations to see whether this could map out Shangri-La. But what struck me was the book, Lost Horizons, and the movie that followed were a hit in the 1930s during the Great Depression. And why? Why did that capture the Western imagination? It was because of the Great Depression, the collapse of the financial markets, and the need to look beyond simply in a material accumulation. So Shangri-La became popular. I also learned that the Shangri-La name is a total misspelling of another word, Shambhala. And Shambhala is a key concept in Tibetan Buddhism. But the location of Shambhala was said to be kept or written down by the 6th Panchen Lama during the 1700s in a sutra called the Shambhala Sutra, which was tucked away in Jashilombo Monastery in central Tibet. And I was told by scholars that that sutra would tell you, if you take a left and see this demon mountain or this spirit mountain, take a right and go here and go there, you're going to get yourself to Shambhala. So I was determined to get my hands on that sutra, which became the guidebook and the map for the last of the 3 expeditions, the search for Shambhala. And so that's what we did. We got to Jashilombo Monastery, got our hands on the sutra, and that became our map. So with another crew, another expedition, we went across western Tibet, a region called Niri, which is the furthest western part. It brings you to the border of Kashmir. And I found something that was also very revealing. People there pray to snow-capped mountains. Snow-capped mountains are considered sacred. Now one would say, oh, that's, mumbo jumbo. Why would people do that? It's not scientific. Actually, it's very scientific. They have it all mapped out. Because in fact, it is the Himalayan mountain glaciers that are supporting more than 1/2 of humanity. The river systems of China, the Yellow River and Yangtze River, Southeast Asia, the Salween, Mekong, and Irrawaddy, and in South Asia, the Indus, Ganges, and Brahmaputra River are all sourced from the glaciers of the Himalayas. And those glaciers are being lost very rapidly because of climate disruption. With the loss of those glaciers, we are losing our water systems. And you also have all kinds of disruption. I attribute some of the earthquake disasters to the change in water systems as it shifts. Certainly the flooding is part of that. And so people pray to sacred mountains. It's very scientific. They had this thing already mapped out. And pursuing the sutra, we crossed western Tibet to the lost kingdom of Guga, an abandoned kingdom. And some people said that might be Shambhala. I looked at that and I said, that's going to be what Manhattan's going to look like one day. Because actually the Shambhala Sutra has a very interesting prophecy. It says that 2,500 years after the nirvana of the first Buddha Shakyamuni, we are in what's called the age of Kali, or destruction, which is caused when greed becomes an ideology driving all human motivation, and it's actually creating a situation where the environment is being destroyed. We in turn destroy ourselves. People fight over resources. You have war everywhere. And it talks about terrorism. It talks about diseases that arise because of changes that can't be cured. And that's all there in this Shambhala Sutra. But the Shambhala Sutra also talks about a future that can occur and arise at any time and change that course of events. And that future is with us. It's a time, or the vision of Shambhala is a future where there's harmony with nature, where you have balance, where you have a better management of resources. So actually I learned from these 3 expeditions, Shambhala is not to be searched for, and Shambhala is not to be found. It's to be created. It's up to each of us to create that future which hasn't come yet, and that's what the sutra is all about. And so actually, in the course of these expeditions, not finding Shangri-La wasn't important. What I found was a number of social entrepreneurs who taught me how to create that future. And these were not PhDs, they were not economists, they were not think tanks in Washington. They were nomads and monks, and they became my teachers. And one of the most interesting one was Jigme Jensen. And he was a monk who decided to set up a cheese factory some 5,000 meters above sea level. And this juxtaposed all of my business thinking, working with multinational corporations. Why would you want to produce cheese there? And he said, my purpose is not just to produce the cheese. My purpose is to give nomads income so they remain nomads. Because if you settle them and they stop grazing or raising yak, and the yak stop eating grass, the permafrost changes, the entire climate, the biodiversity of this region is so fragile that you can't move things around. We want to try and preserve it. And he takes his revenue from yak cheese and he's building schools for nomad kids so they don't have to be settled in the cities, they don't have to be away from their families. Online internet learning for nomad kids. The second teacher was also a monk who decided not to be a monk anymore because rather than meditating, he wanted to put things into action. And he set up a school, a workshop for 50 disabled Tibetans to produce Tibetan arts and crafts. In turn, they were supporting a school of 100 disabled orphans. The idea of a consensus community came from them. And then there was Yang Li Ping, an ethnic Bai dancer who became quite famous, but she was really distraught because as an ethnic minority herself, she knew that every time a road was being cut, every time there's development, the music of her peoples, the songs, the dance, the culture, all the traditions are being lost because they're oral. So she wanted to write them down, record them, but the only way to support it economically was to create a performing arts group, which has won now all kinds of awards in China, and now internationally they've traveled everywhere. And so again, what kept coming up was a business model to preserve culture, in turn, that culture to preserve the environment. And the fourth person was Uttara Kress, an Indian lady who went to Zhongdian and started to set up ecotourism lodges with the message that you don't need big resort hotels. People will come to you if you preserve your environment, because there's a lot of overbuilt hotels everywhere, but there's very few that are integral to the environment. And of course, the greatest teacher of all was Nima Sering. And Nima Sering repeatedly talked to me about the importance of combining material growth with spirituality, or with a greater planetary integrity. He's saying basically in the 21st century, material growth alone is not going to keep people happy. We have to have a balance between spirituality and materialism to create Shambhala. Moreover, he taught me something that I call the economic theory of the three bodhisattvas. Bodhisattva is like a Buddha figure that helps people on their way. There's three. There's compassion, wisdom, and power. And that is, if you have a lot of compassion, but you don't have the skill sets and you don't have the resources, you cannot really help anybody as compassionate as you are. On the other hand, if you've got the resources and you've got the technology, but you don't have compassion, well, let's look at George Bush Jr. That's what we got. So actually, you need to have a balance of these three things to get things done. Learning from these social entrepreneurs, by 2005, I stopped making films. I moved to Lhasa and began to combine their ideas into creating a social enterprise. And knowing something about architecture, because I did restoration before in Beijing, we began to restore one building after another, bringing them back to life. We had the very first boutique hotel license in Lhasa. And we had all Tibetan staff, craftspeople restoring these buildings, keeping their traditions. Everything in these little boutique hotels was made by our own workshop for Tibetans with disabilities. And in turn, we set up a vocational school for Tibetans with disabilities. So when they went back to their villages, they would have a skill set. They would be able to have their own little business. In turn, we went to a site 4,200 meters above sea level where there was a village of disabled nomads who were disabled because of contamination in water because of mining. And we took a building that was being torn down in downtown Lhasa by developers and we moved it there. And we created for them a boutique hotel that they share in the profits in. And it wasn't enough just to create a hotel. We decided to put in a medical clinic because there's so many people going there that need medical help. We got 30 to 40 people there a day seeking medical help. And we decided to have a whole program of bringing medical clinics into monasteries because traditionally Tibetan people will go to a monastery to pray if someone's sick, but why not have medicine there? And by the way, Tibetan medicine was originally developed in the monasteries. It had been taken away. So we decided to put it back. And in turn, we found that this was expanding as a program. Then recognizing another problem is eye care. Because of the ultraviolet light, low carotene in the diet, there's a lot of blindness, cataract, retina. And actually, we realized that if you work with groups there like SIVA, who can do eye operations, about $30 can make a blind person see. So we funded this through our hotel, some 3,000 operations within a period of about 4 years. Now, suddenly, I'm waking up every day working in Lhasa, and I'm not thinking about how much money you're going to make and what you're going to buy with it. Are you going to buy something new? I'm thinking about how many people we can have cured, how many blind people can see. And it changed my whole way of thinking about values. We began another project with what I call tiger rugs. Now, the British Raj had bounty hunting for tiger. I'm sorry if there's anybody British in the audience. But the Tibetans used tiger skins for prayer, meditation mats, and then they began a replacement process through creating tiger rugs. That's why we have tiger rugs today in Nepal and Tibet, because they were replacing something that was becoming extinct. I thought this sends a very powerful message. At Rio+20, the heads of state were arguing over what should be a green economy. If the heads of state learned to weave tiger rugs, they would understand what a green economy is. And then we began programs for women to make jewelry. Most of the jewelry there is actually imported. It isn't made there locally. And we began a program for education, my pet project. Our hotels support a school of 150 kids, free education in a rural area. And it wasn't enough just to create the education program. We decided to work with Montessori International in Beijing, train the teachers up, and have all kinds of Montessori programs with the required curriculum. And one of the things that really struck me with this school is the day we opened, the head of the village came to me and I said, we're going to have Montessori education here in a rural village in Tibet. It's the beginning of Montessori. And he looked at me and goes, I'm just so glad that we have a school because we lose so many kids every year to trucks on the road because they have no place to go when their parents are herding or working in the barley fields. So, you know, the perspective is totally different. That really made me realize the value of this school. And so the whole message here is you can create a business that's profitable, and that business can be helping people have positive impact. We are off the grid. We are entirely solar powered. But you know, if a tree falls in the forest and nobody is there, does it make a sound? So by 2007, we're saying we should be making a sound. We should go out and we should see who else in South Asia in this region's also doing this kind of thing and thinking the same way. And you want to know something? I found out a lot of people all over the region of the Himalayas. There are all kinds of community groups, individual activists, ethnic groups who want to preserve their culture, their heritage, and their environment. And because aid programs are not working, governments are often dysfunctional, they're going back to the community, and they're doing it themselves through business models. And people like Mohammed Yunus who are developing microfinance. There's all kinds of what I call inclusive finance, all kinds of incredibly creative solutions, much of which are being driven by women. And that's happening all across the region. The answer is not monolithic globalization, but actually diversified localization. The solutions are being pioneered by innovators at the grassroots. And from this, we came up with the concept of Himalayan Consensus. And that concept, in turn, began to get recognition by leaders in the region, eventually getting recognition actually by Ban Ki-moon. Himalayan Consensus has three basic principles. Protect local identity, culture, the local community, but do it through a business. Now that means you've got to get finance to people at the local level. Doesn't mean finance going only up to investment banks and up to the very top. It's how do you get it to people and let them have the right to their own business. And in turn, prioritizing protection of the environment, seeing that not only as an obligation, but as a business opportunity, because the next megatrend will be in protecting the environment and actually coming up with renewable and efficient energy solutions. And guess what? There's nowhere that Himalayan Consensus has caught on faster than in the continent of Africa, because the problems are actually the same. And in Africa, the emergence of an idea called African Consensus. So from about the year 2011, I spent most of my time actually in Africa, working with, I was brought there by a rapper named Didier Awadi, who's a very radical West African rapper. And he, at the World Social Forum, wanted to come up with a concept similar to Himalayan Consensus. We had a declaration, an African Consensus declaration. It went that year to the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. That concept of African Consensus then went to the African Economic Commission and became the African Minister's statement at Rio+20. An African Consensus builds on the principles of Himalayan Consensus. It goes beyond that. It talks about food being a human right, the right to have your own agriculture as a human right, the right to water as a human right. They want Monsanto banned from the continent of Africa. They do not want GMOs because they realize the healthcare system can't support it. They want to actually take traditional African medicine and work it into institutions like Chinese and Tibetan medicine have been done and accepted. They don't want to be called witch doctors because actually they have a lot of cures in that continent that can be used globally. And most important is the concept that strife, conflict is not caused by religion. It's actually caused when people's identity is marginalized or their economies are marginalized. And that's when you have conflict. That's what causes it. Let's listen to Alioune Tine for a minute. We can have some sound. Alioune Tine's a very famous human rights activist.
Only way to go out of underdevelopment is to have the second independence of Africa. Destiny of Africa
back into the hands of Africans.
And that brings us to the concept of fusion economics. You've heard I have a book called Fusion Economics. And what is fusion economics? Well, it begins first with a concept. We can say it's Himalayan consensus, it's African consensus, but it's much deeper than that in core. It comes down to the very question of what's socialism and capitalism. I don't know, and I'm an economist. When I hear these terms, I think they're actually, in this century, irrelevant. Deng Xiaoping, in my opinion, buried socialism and capitalism in the last century when he talked about pragmatism. It doesn't matter if the cat is black or white, does it kill a mouse? And actually, the emergence of an acceptance, you know, the Western thinking in Washington is you're democratic, you're capitalist, you know, if you're socialist, then you're communist, you know, and you're not democratic. This thinking is antiquated. It does not reflect reality, and it does not reflect solutions. The invisible hand, greed. We are hearing about this from Milton Friedman. Adam Smith said the invisible hand is going to drive everybody to make the correct decision, and it's been used as an excuse for people to trade derivatives and to liberalize markets and to have no responsibility. Actually, Adam Smith never said that. He only used the term invisible hand once, and it was about people having a commitment through the invisible hand to invest in their own communities, that the driving force would be for your community. If Adam Smith was alive today, he would not be for monolithic globalization. He would be about diversified localization. When he talked about market economy, he was talking about workers, artisans, and farmers getting fair pay for their labor. He was not talking about quantitative easing and the use of those funds for speculation and gambling. He was actually radically condemning the monopoly and the association of government with big business. Yes, if Adam Smith was alive today, he would be on the front cover of America's most progressive magazine, Mother Jones, and he would be a leader at Occupy Wall Street. But where are we going with this? We are actually now looking at new concepts that have to emerge. We need pragmatic economics. We don't need theory. Part of the problem with our economics today is so much in my country, the United States, is driven by academics who have never been in business, who have never had to deal with what real economics is, and that is managing resources in an efficient way so that most people can get the best benefit and the most expansive benefit. They've never had to deal with that. I often ask the question, how can IMF advisors go into a country in Asia and advise the government on village economics if those advisors themselves have never spent a single night in a village? Ask yourself that question. Does it make sense? But that's exactly what's happening. And so they're saying we have to have neoliberalism, which is market fundamentalism. We have to decontrol everything. But in fact, that's not what they're practicing. And so the whole point with fusion economics is we need to be looking at things in a much more, you can say, sustainable way, pragmatic way, but we have to actually be looking at diversified localization. We have to bring into a concept compassionate capital. You can have business. We're not against business. We're against the forces that don't give people the right to their own business. And allowing capital to be used in an efficient way to benefit people in a more holistic way. We talk about gross national happiness from Bhutan. Actually, the first person to talk about this was not the Bhutanese king. It was Robert Kennedy, who was shot. He was the first person to question GDP as the measurement of growth. And of course, core to this is the question of our environment, water resources, the protection of planetary integrity. Will we be able to create an economic system which is pragmatic, but can actually then create a future for our kids? This is really the big question. And you know, the result of what we've been having is we have a situation now where you have the 1% of the 1%. You have finance through quantitative easing, which has gone all the way up to the top, but it has not gone down to people. We are not having finance to communities. In fact, in a country like the United States, we could be learning from Muhammad Yunus. We need to reinvigorate our communities and our localities. We need to actually have businesses that are local and reinvigorate those economies. And of course, the thing we're going to be talking about in a minute is the environment, and how the challenge of the environment can actually be an opportunity for regridding communities, revitalizing localities, and creating job opportunities for people. Because actually that crisis, in Chinese we say crisis is two words, it's danger and it's opportunity. There's an opportunity there. And so from 2013 through up to present, I spent a lot of my time working as advisor to China's Ministry of Environmental Protection under support from the European Union. And what we came up with was a proposal for China, a 5-pillar framework for trying to look at how China could at least take the lead in addressing its problems. The first major issue is infrastructure. So much of the economy in China over the past decade has been driven by fixed asset investments into redundant industries and redundant infrastructure that they have contaminated their environment, ruined their water systems, ruined their food systems. And what we're saying is, okay, you may continue fixed asset investments to drive the economy, but change the nature of it. Coal is enemy number one. Let's get away from coal and use this as an opportunity to invest in new renewable solutions. There's 3 provinces in China, Ningxia, Shanxi, and Inner Mongolia, that are coal-based, which have to be addressed through government spending to create new industries that can open up new business opportunities and employ people in grid conversion. 70% of China's grid is coal. And from this is the concept that we proposed of smart, green, and blue cities. And this proposal that we had in 2013 issued on April 26 was our first proposal. 4 drafts later, this year, April 25th, was adopted by the government at the Central Committee level and will be the green print going to COP. And why was Europe involved? Because actually in Europe you have all the technology, but the scale is too small. Finland is developing houses that can create electricity. Population of 4 million people, scale it with China, that's not even a district. Traffic is a perennial problem in the country. They need smart cities, they need to build smart transport systems. And of course, water is core to infrastructure. The water systems in China are broken. 60% of the water is toxic. There is no reason in China to be using water in flush toilets. There's new technologies, pressure that needed to be used, gray water. And so on top of your infrastructure investment, credit and fiscal policy is the next pillar. How do you drive businesses to follow the conversion in infrastructure? That's got to come with taxes and rebates. A building like this can completely turn all of its electricity over into LED, but why was it going to do it unless it has a tax break? Why would people invest in these solutions unless it's the bottom line? We're not saying that it's about hugging trees. We're saying it's about your bottom line. And that's where the government has to have the policies. And this has been adopted as the second pillar in the program. And of course, it comes down to the issue of gadgets. Every single gizmo that's being made by private sector can also be with renewable solutions. I like to use the example of my watch. This little watch is solar powered. It is so efficient. It does everything. Now, if that can be solar powered, your iPhone can be solar powered, your MacBook should be solar powered. My next recommendation to the Occupy movement is occupy the Mac stores, because actually all of our gadgets that we're banging on all the time or dropping apps off of are actually eating up a lot of fossil fuels. That's a big, big fossil fuel eater. The concept of growth. We in Bhutan have gross national happiness. We started to say to the Chinese government, you have high growth rates. Yeah, 8%, 9%, 10%. It doesn't mean anything, because your cost of repairing the environment, water systems, agricultural systems, and healthcare means that that cost is going back to the government, back to business, back to the private sector. It's affecting everything. You have too much redundant growth. You need quality growth. You need to think about what is growth. We talked about GDP plus environment, plus healthcare, plus social well-being, and heritage preservation. If you lose your heritage, doesn't matter how much growth you have. What do you have? You're rootless. Governance, the protection of the environment. Red lines are needed. One of the things that was adopted in the April 25th decision that we recommended was certain areas of the country should be just left alone. under the administration of the past premier Wen Jiabao, plethora of mining licenses were issued. Mining was viewed as a growth industry. We said, stop mining. Rethink it. You have such a delicate biodiversity in China right now. That fragility has got to be preserved. And to my surprise, they're even marking red lines on marine areas. And education. This is an area where you have a system where you can teach values through China's powerful propaganda system, but more important, investing in your youth. Investing in the technologies that are needed, because what we're talking about is not just solar energy. What we're talking about is finance, law, all the fields will need to create jobs for people who are not just blue-collar workers, but also people who are graduating with master's degrees and PhDs. And moreover, investing in education is something we should be doing in America. We are letting kids graduate from school with huge debt. Why are we doing that? Education's an asset. The future has got to be on the technologies and the application of those technologies commercially. I'm not saying that's not technology. In my mind, that is antique spyware being used to suck capital off of the market. We need to invest in real technologies, technologies that are going to actually address the problems of climate disruption and create new solutions and jobs. And that is where that innovation has to be applied, and that's only going to happen with capital, and it's only going to happen if the capital market gets involved, because we are sharing a little spacecraft together out in space, and you know if we're going to crash that, we have nowhere else to go, as Nima Sirin said. Now, to wind up, because I've gone over my 30 minutes, and we were talking about education, I'm going to end on a story. And it's a story that comes from Tibet. And that story is about 4 animals in a tree. And there was an elephant, a monkey, a rabbit, and a bird. And the 4 animals had a fight over who was closest to the tree. And the elephant said, I'm closest to the tree because I bathe in the shadow of the tree every single day, so it cools me down. And the monkey said, no, I'm closest to the tree because I eat the fruit of the tree every day. And the rabbit snickered and said, no, I'm closest to the tree because I nibble at the root of the tree every day, so I got to be the one who's closest. And the little bird flew and came by and said, no, I'm so sorry. I'm the one who's closest to the tree. The 3 other animals looked at the bird and said, how can you say that? You're just a teeny tiny little bird. And the bird said, no, it was me who brought the seed that planted the tree. This story reminds us of 2 things. It reminds us of the interconnectivity of everything. I call it the economic theory of the interconnectivity of everything. And it reminds us of the power of giving more than taking. Now, every kid in the Himalayas knows this story, even if they have no education. And I have said repeatedly that the day this story is adopted into the MBA curriculum at Harvard Business School is the day that we begin to have change. So thank you very much.